Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
At Thanksgiving, my uncle stood up, half drunk on the Chardonnay he'd insisted was the only white worth drinking, and raised his glass with that fake smile he always wore when he was showing off. "To your sister," he said, pausing just long enough to make sure the entire table was watching him, who just closed on her second condo. His voice had that tone, the one he uses when he's pretending to be supportive, but really just wants everyone to admire him for knowing the right people, for having the most successful niece, and for having something to toast about. Everyone clapped, including my dad, who glanced at me for a half second like maybe he was wondering how I'd take it, but didn't care enough to find out. I was already bracing myself. I'd been through enough family dinners to know what came next. And then it came, just like I knew it would. Uncle Rick turned to me, with his stupid grin and his crooked teeth stained by 30 years of cheap cigars and bullshit, and said, "Still renting." Like it was a joke. Like it was all in good fun. Like humiliating me, again, in front of the family, was just part of the Thanksgiving tradition. The room went still for a second, not because anyone was shocked, but because they were waiting for me to laugh along, like I always did, to take the jab on the chin and let it pass like water under a bridge. That was the role I'd played for years, the quiet one, the single one, the one who never quite measured up. But this time, I just smiled. Calm. No heat in my voice. Just a quiet little shrug, and the words I'd been waiting to say for over 2 years. "Nah," I said, setting my wine glass down just slowly enough for everyone to be watching. "I just bought a Lakehouse. Paid cash. I'll send you a photo later." He choked. Like literally choked. Wine in his throat, face turning red, coughing like the words physically hit him in the chest. My mom reached to pat his back, and my dad gave a weird little laugh like he didn't know what to do with the silence that suddenly blanketed the table. And me? I just kept chewing on a bite of mashed potatoes and looked down at my plate like nothing had happened. But something had. Because in that moment, the power shifted. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I wasn't the punchline. I was the one holding the cards. And they had no idea what I'd been building behind the scenes. See, what none of them knew, what I'd never told anyone, was that the past 2 years of silence weren't about distance or depression or some post-breakup identity crisis, like my sister whispered about at brunch with my mom. No. I'd been quiet because I was working. Planning. Saving. Playing dumb. Letting them think I was stuck. Letting them believe their version of me. And it worked. They underestimated me so completely that when I dropped that one sentence at Thanksgiving, it felt like I'd detonated a grenade at the table, and only I had the safety pin. But if I'm being honest, this didn't start at that dinner. That dinner was just the moment the whole house of cards fell. This actually started way before that, back when I was 19 and home from college for the summer, when Uncle Rick laughed in my face for studying software development instead of something useful like business or real estate. It started when my dad told me I should be more like Lauren, my younger sister, who wore heels in high school and built her personality around Zillow listings by the time she was 23. It started every time my mom asked how my job was going, then immediately interrupted to talk about my cousin's wedding or my sister's new car or what Rick's son was doing at his internship. It was a lifetime of being looked at like I was the one who didn't quite get it. The one who was a little too weird, a little too private, not flashy enough, not loud enough, not proud enough of what I'd built. I knew they talked about me. I wasn't clueless. I just stopped correcting them. When I skipped Thanksgiving last year, Lauren told the group chat I was probably dating another loser. When I missed Christmas, my dad said he hoped I'd at least call because it was rude not to acknowledge family. They all made it about themselves. Nobody ever asked what I needed or what I was doing. And that's fine. Because while they were watching each other's stories and showing off new countertops and throwing parties to celebrate a $15,000 kitchen backsplash, I was quietly driving out to a little town 2 hours away on weekends, wearing old jeans, gutting drywall, learning plumbing from YouTube tutorials, and slowly turning a moldy dump of a foreclosure into a fully paid-off lakehouse worth more than both of Lauren's condos combined. They didn't see it. Because I didn't show them. And I didn't show them because I learned, slowly and painfully, that when people see you working on something they don't understand, they'll either mock it, minimize it, or try to claim credit for it when it succeeds. So I said nothing. I kept my mouth shut and smiled through the comments. I let them think I was renting. Hell, I let them think I was failing. Because the thing about family is, if they've decided who you are, they will twist everything you do to fit that story, unless you drop something so big, so undeniable, that it shatters the narrative right in their face. And that's what I did. One sentence. 7 words. And the sound of Uncle Rick choking on his wine was probably the most satisfying moment of my adult life. Not because I wanted to hurt him, I didn't. But because I needed them to stop looking down on me. I needed them to see me, maybe for the first time, not as the sad, single sister who just never figured it out, but as someone who made it on her own, without their help, without needing their approval, and without ever becoming the thing they wanted me to be. What I said at that dinner wasn't for applause. It wasn't to brag. It was to make them understand I don't need to prove anything anymore. And now that I've said it once, I won't say it again. They can believe what they want. They can spin it how they need to. But they'll never forget that moment. And they'll never see me the same again. And what they don't know yet, what no one at that table realized, is that the Lakehouse. That's just the beginning. It's strange how the things that shape you most don't always come with a big event or some explosion that changes everything in a single moment. Sometimes it's just the same feeling over and over again. So subtle and so constant that it becomes the water you're swimming in, and you don't even notice you're drowning until one day you look around and realize you've been under for years. Quietly holding your breath and pretending it doesn't bother you that everyone sees right through you like you're made of air. That's what it was like growing up in my family, not abusive, not dramatic, not movie-level dysfunctional, but something worse in a way, because it was quiet and polite and brushed in layers of good intentions. So you couldn't even name the feeling without sounding ungrateful. It probably started back in high school, though I didn't really recognize it then. I just knew that whatever I did, it was always a little bit wrong, a little bit less exciting, a little bit not enough. When I got into the state university on a scholarship, my dad said, "That's great, really," but then added, "Your sister's looking at private schools, she's aiming high," which is smart. When I landed a paid internship the summer after my sophomore year, Uncle Rick told me that it sounded fine, I guess, but warned me not to waste time with those computer jobs because real money's in property, not programming. When I graduated early and got hired at a tech startup, nobody in the family really asked what I did. They just sort of nodded vaguely, then pivoted the conversation back to Lauren's real estate classes or someone's kid getting into med school. At first, I thought it was just me being sensitive, so I tried harder. I brought updates, I asked about their lives, I showed interest. I laughed at the jokes I didn't find funny and accepted that I'd probably never be the person they bragged about at Christmas parties. But over time it became clear that it wasn't about what I did or didn't do, it was about how I didn't fit into the little script they had written in their heads, where success looked like marrying early, buying a house in the same zip code, having 2 kids and a golden retriever, and talking about mortgage rates over barbecued chicken on Sunday afternoons. I didn't want that life, not because I thought I was better than it, but because it simply didn't fit me. I didn't want to be tied down to a 30-year loan and PTA meetings and wine nights with women who only talked about countertops and husbands and whatever they read in a self-help book about manifesting abundance. And when I met Tony, the guy I dated through most of my 30s, I actually thought maybe I'd finally done something they could get behind. He was tall, charming, had a decent job in finance, and could talk football with my dad without sounding like he was trying too hard, and for a while, everyone seemed to warm up to me a little more. Suddenly I was invited to more dinners, added to group texts, even included in vacation plans. It felt like I'd cracked some code, like maybe all it took was attaching myself to someone who fit the mold. But the whole time, something felt off. Tony was the kind of guy who could turn on the charm in public, but behind closed doors, he was cold, distracted, and way too interested in his phone. He called me too intense when I asked about our future, said I overanalyzed everything, and made jokes about how I didn't have the warmest vibe, like that was just my personality. When I found out he'd been cheating, not just once, but repeatedly with one of Lauren's friends no less, I confronted him, ended it, and told my family what had happened, expecting maybe a moment of support, maybe some anger, or even just quiet empathy. Instead, my mom sighed like I was overreacting. My dad said, "Well, relationships are complicated," and Uncle Rick literally laughed and said, "At least he stuck around longer than the last guy." Lauren didn't say much at all, just gave me this weird smile and said, "Maybe now you'll finally focus on yourself for a bit," like my heartbreak was just a detour on my road to self-improvement. Nobody was angry for me. Nobody defended me. Nobody cut him off or even reached out to see how I was holding up. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't one of them. Not really. I was family by blood, sure, but emotionally I was a stranger. They tolerated me when I made them feel good or gave them something to gossip about, but I was never the one they truly saw or cared about when it actually mattered. After that, I stopped showing up. Not dramatically, not with some big announcement or a fight or a block list. I just slowly started saying no to invites, stopped answering group chats, and let myself fade into the background like they always treated me anyway. I thought maybe someone would notice, maybe someone would check in or ask if I was okay, but they didn't. A full year went by and not a single person called to ask where I'd been. I watched their lives from a distance, sometimes checking Lauren's posts just to see what kind of perfect caption she was putting under photos of her new backsplash or her latest investment property. Uncle Rick still bragged about her like she walked on water. My dad made passive comments about how he just hoped I was figuring things out, and my mom told friends I was on a journey of self-discovery. But the truth is, I wasn't lost or confused or licking my wounds. I was just done trying to belong where I clearly didn't. And in that silence, something started to grow, something solid, private, and mine. I spent my weekends driving out to a small town no one in my family would ever think to visit, looking at properties, researching market trends, calculating how far my savings could stretch if I stopped living like I needed to impress anyone. I started small, just thoughts, spreadsheets, Zillow searches at night, and then, one day, I saw it, a listing for a lakefront dump with potential. It was cheap because it was ugly, and ugly because no one had cared for it in years. But I saw the bones. I saw the numbers. I saw what it could become. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't ask anyone for their opinion. I made an offer. I closed the deal. I bought the damn thing. Alone. It wasn't revenge, not then. It was survival. It was the slow act of reclaiming something I didn't even realize I'd lost, the ability to choose myself without explanation. But as the walls came down and the mold came out and the house started to transform, something else started to build inside me, not bitterness exactly, but something sharper, more focused. A readiness. A quiet confidence. And when the next Thanksgiving invite came, with all the usual fake warmth and performative family concern, I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd yes. Not because I wanted their approval, but because I was ready to stop playing small. They hadn't seen me in 2 years. They thought I was still licking wounds. Still healing. Still renting. But they were about to find out just how far from the truth that was. There's a certain kind of power that comes from being underestimated for so long that everyone around you forgets you're even capable of doing something outside the role they've assigned you, and for me, that role had always been the quiet one. The one with the decent enough job. The one who never made waves, never demanded attention, never stepped out of line, and never gave anyone a reason to clap or care beyond the occasional polite, passing question about how things were going in that vague, surface-level way people ask when they're not really listening. So when Lauren bought her first condo and made it the centerpiece of every family conversation for an entire year, complete with open house parties, Pinterest-inspired decor walkthroughs, and long-winded stories about negotiating the interest rate like she was running a hedge fund, I said nothing, even though I was already deep into fixing up the Lakehouse, spending my weekends tearing up tile, learning how to install baseboards, and taking online electrical courses because I couldn't afford to screw it up or hire someone else to do it. Then came her second condo, and with it the confirmation that she had become the family's undisputed golden child, the one everyone bragged about without shame, as if her name carried prestige, as if simply knowing her made them more accomplished by association. Uncle Rick practically foamed at the mouth with pride every time she showed him new progress photos, and my dad, who never remembered what I actually did for a living, could rattle off the square footage of Lauren's investment properties like he was her damn real estate agent. And every time I sat quietly through another slideshow of granite countertops or listened to my mother go on about how proud she was that at least one of her girls was building something, I would just nod, smile, and let them believe I was still somewhere in my overpriced one-bedroom apartment, barely making rent, still floating through life like a lost cause too proud to admit I needed guidance. But what they didn't know, and what I never once even hinted at, was that by the time Lauren closed on that second condo, I had already put in over 18 months of sweat, savings, and strategic work into that lake house. It wasn't a condo in a trendy zip code or a sleek downtown unit with rooftop access and exposed brick. It was something entirely different, something most of them would never understand, and that was exactly why I kept it to myself. I didn't need their input, their skepticism, or their unsolicited advice about how I should really think about getting into real estate, like Lauren did. As if she was the pioneer of owning property, and I was just some wandering idiot in need of a financial epiphany. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore. I had done that for too long and gotten nothing but dismissiveness in return. I was building something entirely for myself, without noise, without validation, and without permission. The Lakehouse started as a disaster, and honestly, that was the part one liked most. It had nothing going for it on the surface, which meant no one else saw the value I saw, and that gave me space to work without interruption, without comparison, and without anyone trying to claim credit for it later. I bought it outright with the money I'd saved from living like a monk for years, no vacations, no fancy clothes, no subscriptions I didn't absolutely need, and while Lauren posted boomerangs of charcuterie boards at wine tastings with her realtor friends, I was hauling debris out of a rotting kitchen with my bare hands, pulling rusty nails out of old beams, and sweating through summer days in a house that didn't have working plumbing for the first 6 weeks. I learned how to do things I never thought I'd even attempt. Things like rewiring outlets, leveling cabinets, installing insulation, not because I suddenly decided I was into construction, but because there was something deeply satisfying about creating something real with my own hands, something that didn't need to be filtered through anyone else's expectations or approval. And the more I worked, the more I realized how much peace there was in the silence, not just the physical quiet of being alone out there in the middle of nowhere, but the emotional quiet of being free from judgment, free from competition, and free from the constant undercurrent of not being good enough. So when the Thanksgiving invitation came in after 2 years of being left off the list or forgotten altogether, I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't flattered. I knew exactly why they were reaching out this time. Lauren's second condo had given them another reason to host, another milestone to toast, another excuse to gather everyone so they could talk about how successful she was while ignoring the daughter who apparently wasn't worth inviting when she was going through a breakup or working overtime just to stay afloat. I didn't hesitate when I said yes. Not because I missed them. Not because I wanted to reconnect. But because I knew I was walking in with something they couldn't touch. I planned every detail. I didn't change my appearance. I didn't show up looking flashy or different or like I was trying to make a point. I didn't bring a slideshow of before and after photos or offer stories about sweat equity or market appreciation. I didn't even bring it up. Because the thing about power, real power, is that it doesn't need to announce itself. I didn't have to say a word about what I'd built. I just had to wait. And like clockwork, they did exactly what I knew they would. They praised Lauren. They toasted her. They bathed her in applause and admiration while side-eyeing me like a guest who had wandered in from the wrong address. And when Uncle Rick stood up to make his little speech and turned to me with that familiar smirk and those stupid words, "Still renting," I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was over. My silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. It was the long game. It was the thing none of them ever saw coming, because they were too busy looking past me to ever wonder what I was doing while they were celebrating each other. And now, the best part wasn't the house. It wasn't the money I'd saved or the way the sunset hit the water on a good day. The best part was knowing that when I finally decided to speak, when I dropped that line and watched them choke on their own assumptions, I wouldn't need to explain anything. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they had me figured out. But they forgot something crucial. The one who says the least is usually the one you should watch the closest. And they were about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the realization that the sister they ignored, the daughter they underestimated, and the niece they laughed at had played them all without even trying. There's something fascinating about the way people respond to silence, especially when they've built their entire sense of superiority on the assumption that you have nothing worth saying, because when you sit quietly long enough, when you refuse to play their game or feed their egos, they don't interpret it as calm or confidence or even indifference. They see it as proof that you're beneath them, that you're passive, weak, stuck, incapable of anything bold or impressive, and that's why, for years, I let them believe exactly that. I never corrected them when they made comments about how I was probably just getting by, never pushed back when my dad asked whether I'd thought about maybe switching careers, never argued when Lauren talked over me at family dinners, assuming that her latest property flip or yoga certification somehow outweighed anything I might have to contribute. I let them think I was invisible, and by doing that, I created the space I needed to move without their noise polluting my progress. When I agreed to come to Thanksgiving this time, after missing 2 in a row without so much as a text from anyone asking where I was or if I was okay, I didn't go in with any expectation that things would be different, because people like them don't change. Not unless they're forced to, and I had no interest in forcing anything. I didn't care if they noticed I was doing better, didn't care if they asked about work or my house or my life. I didn't go for validation or applause or any kind of emotional repair. I went because I was ready to be in that room again without feeling like I had to shrink myself just to keep the peace. I had nothing to prove, not to them, not to myself, and that feeling alone was a kind of victory I hadn't known I'd been craving until it settled into my chest and stayed there like an anchor. Walking into my parents' house that day was surreal in the way that returning to any familiar battlefield always is. Everything looked the same smell of overcooked stuffing, the same strained politeness layered over years of unresolved tension, the same peck-on-the-cheek greetings from relatives who didn't actually know a single thing about my life, but acted like proximity equaled intimacy. Lauren, of course, was already in the center of everything, like a showroom centerpiece, dressed to impress and holding court with a glass of white wine, explaining something about mortgage rates to a cousin who clearly didn't care but nodded along because that's what we all did. We nodded, we smiled, we let her take up all the space. And I let it happen. I sat, I listened, I participated just enough to avoid suspicion, and I waited, not because I was scheming or hoping for a dramatic reveal, but because I knew, eventually, the moment would come, the moment it always came, when someone would find a way to remind me of where they thought I stood. I didn't have to prompt it. I didn't even have to speak. Because like clockwork, Uncle Rick, loud, self-satisfied, and 4 drinks in by the time we hit dessert, stood up, glass raised, and started what he clearly believed was going to be the highlight of the evening. To Lauren, he said, with all the dramatic flair of someone who thinks every word out of his mouth is gold, who just closed on her second condo, a real inspiration to all of us. Applause followed, of course, mostly from people who were either too polite to do otherwise or too disinterested to challenge the script. My dad clapped. My mom did her usual proud mom half-smile. Lauren beamed like a spotlight had just landed on her, and she nodded like a queen accepting tribute. I sipped my wine and kept my eyes on my plate, not because I was intimidated or trying to disappear, but because I already knew what was coming next. Uncle Rick turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I existed, and with a smirk that he probably thought was charming, but had always made my skin crawl, said, "And what about you, Mel? Still renting?" His tone wasn't cruel, not overtly, but it was the kind of thing that hits harder than outright insults because it's laced with that fake amusement, that calculated condescension that says, "We all know you're the disappointment, but let's pretend we're just joking so you don't cry about it later." I looked up, smiled, not forced, not fake, but the kind of smile that comes from knowing you're about to detonate something and no one has any idea it's coming, and said, "Nah. I just bought a lake house. Paid cash. I'll send you a photo later." And then I took another sip, set my glass down, and went back to my food. For about 3 full seconds, no one said a word, and in that silence, I watched it happen, the processing, the recalculating. The confusion that flickered across faces that hadn't even considered the possibility that I might be doing something meaningful with my life while they were too busy watching Lauren juggle mortgages and reposting her Zillow links on Facebook. Uncle Rick, caught mid-sip, actually choked on his wine, coughing into his napkin while my mom reached to pat his back and Lauren froze with her mouth slightly open, as if the programming had glitched and she didn't quite know how to respond. I didn't offer follow-up details. I didn't describe the renovations or the equity or the view from the deck. I didn't even say where it was. Because it wasn't about the lake house. It was about the fact that I didn't owe them anything, not even the satisfaction of a full explanation. I could have walked in that day with photos, spreadsheets, receipts, a slideshow even, and it still wouldn't have had the same impact as saying it once and letting the silence carry the rest. Later, after the dishes were cleared and most people had gone home, Lauren found me in the hallway while I was grabbing my coat. She didn't ask to see pictures. She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she leaned in with that too sweet voice she always used when she was trying to disguise a threat as concern and said, "So, a lake house, huh? That's unexpected. Are you sure that's a smart move? All alone out there? What if something goes wrong?" I turned, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "I've been alone for years, Lauren. Turns out, it's when I do my best work." And then I walked out, coat in hand, keys in my pocket, heart pounding not from confrontation, but from the quiet, complete satisfaction of knowing that I'd finally said what needed to be said, not to convince her, not to prove anything, but to remind her. And all of them, that the person they dismissed had stopped playing by their rules a long time ago. I didn't post about it. I didn't gloat. I didn't text the group chat with pictures of the view or a link to the property site. Because the beauty of real power is that it doesn't need to announce itself. It just arrives, uninvited, and changes everything. And after that night, nothing would be the same again. It's a strange feeling when you finally win a game you weren't even sure you were playing anymore, not because you stopped caring about the outcome, but because at some point, the effort of defending your worth, explaining your choices, and hoping for some basic respect becomes so exhausting and so hollow that you stop playing to win and start living just to breathe freely, quietly, on your own terms. And maybe that's what made the ending so satisfying. Not that I embarrassed anyone or made some grand announcement about how wrong they'd all been, but that I delivered my final move with the same restraint and precision they had mistaken all those years for weakness. I didn't need applause. I didn't even need acknowledgement. I just needed them to feel the weight of my silence and understand that the version of me they had kept in their heads, the one who was always a few steps behind, always settling, always in need of guidance, no longer existed. It wasn't until a full week after Thanksgiving that I heard from Uncle Rick. I'd half expected a snide text within the hour, some sarcastic comment, or maybe even an apology cloaked in condescension, but instead, I got radio silence. No reactions, no follow-ups, no questions, just a quiet space where their noise used to be. When his message finally came, it was short and vaguely passive-aggressive, like he was trying to sound casual, but couldn't hide the need for confirmation. "So, Lakehouse, huh?" it said. "That for real?" No greeting. No punctuation. Just 6 words that told me everything I needed to know. He didn't believe me, not fully, or maybe he just couldn't stomach the idea that the girl he'd spent years mocking was now sitting on something bigger, better, and more permanent than any of his precious real estate trophies. I didn't respond right away. I left the message on read for 2 days, not out of spite, but because I wanted the delay to say what words didn't have to. Then, late one night, I walked out onto the deck with a glass of wine, took a single photo of the lake in the dark with the lights reflecting off the water, and sent it to him with no caption. Not a selfie, not a filtered shot from Zillow, not a posed moment meant for social media, just a quiet, unedited glimpse of the thing I had built, the life I was living, the silence I had earned. He didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next one. And I knew why. Because there was nothing left to say. Lauren, on the other hand, reacted exactly how I knew she would, not with direct confrontation, not with overt jealousy, but with the kind of performative escalation only she could deliver. Within 48 hours of that Thanksgiving dinner, she had posted a celebratory reel of her latest renovation, with dramatic before and after footage and some generic caption about "the grind never stops," followed by a list of vague affirmations about abundance, gratitude, and manifesting success. She didn't mention me, she didn't have to. The entire thing was a staged attempt to recenter the spotlight, to make sure no one asked too many questions about the sister who had dropped a casual bombshell at the family table and then left without looking back. It would have been easy to clap back, to post my own photos, to share the process, the blueprints, the sweat and work that had gone into every inch of that lake house. I could have put together a thread about the transformation, about the ROI, about the mental and emotional payoff of betting on yourself when no one else believes in you. But I didn't. Because part of my power, the real part, the part they still didn't understand, came from the fact that I didn't need them to see it to feel it. I didn't need the likes, the comments, the validation. I wasn't doing any of this to prove them wrong anymore. I was doing it to prove myself right. A few days later, one of Lauren's friends, someone I barely knew but had met at a baby shower years ago, messaged me privately on Instagram. "Is it true you bought a lake house?" she asked. "Rick said something at brunch, but made it sound like he helped you with the down payment." I stared at the message for a long time before I responded. And then, without a single word, I posted a screenshot of the wire transfer receipt along with the title deed, both with my name, paid in full, no cosigner, no lender. I left out the address. No caption. Just the facts. The reaction was immediate. Not viral, but loud enough. People saw it. Family saw it. Mutual friends saw it. And most importantly, Lauren saw it. I didn't have to tag anyone or follow up with a gloating message. The silence that followed said more than any carefully crafted post ever could. Uncle Rick never messaged again. Lauren didn't respond either, but she did stop posting renovation updates for a while. My dad called, not to congratulate me, but to ask if everything was okay between me and the family. I told him I was fine. I told him I was just busy. And when he said, "It wouldn't hurt to be a little more gracious about your success," I almost laughed. Because that was the moment I realized they still didn't get it. They still thought the story was about proving them wrong, about getting even, about rubbing their noses in it. But it wasn't. It never had been. This was never about revenge. Not really. It was about walking away from the version of myself they had created, the one I had carried for too long out of habit, fear, and loyalty to a family that only ever saw me in relation to their expectations. It was about choosing myself, fully and finally, and standing in that choice with so much certainty that I didn't flinch when the people I once begged to understand me were left stunned, confused, and scrambling for a new narrative. I still live at the lake house. I still don't post much. I go into town, I work remotely, I kayak sometimes after dinner, and on weekends I build furniture in the garage not because I have to, but because I like the feeling of working with my hands. The peace is real. The quiet is earned. And every time someone from that old circle tries to reconnect or check in or grab coffee and catch up, I let the message sit. I let the silence say everything. Let them toast to condos. Let them hold their rehearsed celebrations and curated lives. I'll be on my dock, barefoot, glass in hand, watching the water ripple under a sky that doesn't need filters, knowing that for the first time in my life, I didn't just win, I redefined the entire game. Checkmate.